Hi, my name is Nick from Accounting Add-on, and in this video we'll cover how to manipulate your data in Power BI but through Power Query. So we'll explain how to filter your data, how to sort it, as well as different operations you can do on your data. Enjoy! So we've already set up our model in OdataLink and selected a few endpoints. If we scroll to the bottom, we can see we've got our OData feed already set up, and that's where we can copy the URL we need that we can use through Power BI and Excel. So we'll go ahead and we'll copy our URL, and then we'll jump into Power BI, we'll go Get Data, OData Feed, and we'll paste that URL in. We'll click OK, and this will list all the different endpoints that we've made available. We'll use the Invoices endpoint for most of the demo, so I'll just select that and click Transform, and that'll bring up the Power Query Editor. The Power Query Editor is pretty powerful and has most of the functionality available through the UI. It has a series of tabs at the top where you can do different operations, but you can also do specific operations just by manipulating the columns. One common operation is to filter your data. To do that, you can grab any column you want and use the drop-down and choose what you want to see. So for type of invoice, I'll select ACREC and click OK. Filtering allows you to restrict the data you download. If you add your filters early in Power Query, those filters will actually be sent to OdataLink and processed directly by Xero or MYOB. And this speeds up the process of downloading the data. Because of this, as a general rule, I recommend you set up your filters first. The minute you've added the filter step, you can see on the right hand side it's added the filtered row step. And that's the instruction that Power Query uses to filter the row. In addition to that, you can also see in the formula bar at the top the language that Power Query uses under the hood and how it filters your data. In this case, you can see it's pulling the invoices table, selecting each row whose type is equal to account receivable. If you want, you can also dig more into that language. It's fully documented by Microsoft and you can actually learn quite a bit. But again, the simplest way to start is usually just to manipulate the UI. Now we'll go back to the Steps panel on the right hand side. And if you want to remove any step, you can see it has a little X icon on the left of its name. You can click on that to remove it. On the right of its name, you'll see a gear icon, and that allows you to refine the step. Now clicking on it will bring up a dialog that allows you to edit that step. In this example, you can see it's doing a filter of the row where the type is equal to account receivable. But there's other things we can also do. If you click on the equals drop down, you can see we can change it to equals, not equals, begins with, and so on. Now that gear icon will show a different dialog depending on the type of step. And that's one additional way you can revise and refine the step you've added. One thing I personally do quite often in Power Query is rename my steps. And I do that to get a sense of what the steps actually are. At the moment, the step just says filtered rows, but it could be any column and any value. I can't tell what is going on without reading what it says in the formula bar at the top. What I recommend is you right-click on your step and rename it. And I'll call it Filter ACREC. And that'll give me a bit more information as to what is actually being filtered. Another operation we can do is to sort the data. And that is done almost the same way as filters. We can select the drop-down above the column and choose whether we want to sort ascending or descending. It will then add the step Sorted Rows, and I can right-click and rename it to Sort by Date. Now that we have a few more steps, we can learn how to reorder them. If you want to change the order of those steps, you can drag and drop them in the correct order, and you can also right-click on any step and move it before or after. Another simple operation we can do is reordering columns. It's not as relevant for Power BI, but is more useful for Excel if we're trying to create a format with very specific column order. To do that, you need to select the column you want, click and drag it to where you want it to go. It'll add the step Reordered Columns, and in the formula bar you'll notice it includes the order of every single column. So although we only swapped the order of the status and reference field, if we click on the drop down here, you can see every single column is being mentioned. Reordering columns is not just specifying the order of 2 columns, but instead it specifies the order of all the columns. Similarly to ordering columns, we can remove columns we're not interested in. And that's useful to reduce the memory load on our data set. To do this, we can select the column we want and press delete on our keyboard. And that will add the remove column step. Another way we can remove a column is by right-clicking on its name and choosing remove. One parenthesis worth mentioning here is you'll notice when I right-click on a column, there are a lot of operations that appear. You can find out additional steps you can apply to your data simply by right-clicking on a column. There's one more useful operation you can do on fields, and it applies to very specific types of fields. You'll notice at the top above the column, there's the name of the column, due date, but there's also an icon representing the type. So this is a date. Reference is text, and if I scroll across, subtotal's a number. If I scroll back a bit, you'll notice here there's contacts, payments, credit notes, and they all have values showing up in yellow. One says record and one says table. And you'll notice the icon next to the name is different. These are special fields. They also don't have the normal drop-down, but a left-right drop-down next to them. A contact is not just a contact name. It's actually a contact object or a contact container. And if I select a single record, you can see it has a contact ID, being the database ID within Xero, and a contact name. Payments is different. It's a table of payment records. And that table has multiple columns. You can see it has a payment ID, a batch payment ID, a date, and so on. Now they work differently when you expand them. I won't go too far in all the differences, but I'll try to showcase the main difference. With contacts, a single invoice has a single contact, and that's why it shows up as a record. If I click on the little icon in the top right, I can choose what field to expand, and you can see I can select contact ID and contact name. If I click OK, you can actually now see those values being expanded and included. Now this works well for contacts because it's a single record, and there is that one-to-one relationship between invoices and contacts. Payments is different. An invoice may have multiple payments applied, and that's why it shows up as a table. When we expand it, it'll behave slightly differently, and I want you to be aware of what it does. You'll notice though at the moment there's 45 invoices, and I can expand payment exactly the same way. If I click on the button, I can choose the field I want and click OK. But if I scroll to the bottom, you'll see I now have 47 records instead of 45. And that's because I have one invoice with multiple payments. If I were to filter for a specific invoice number, 1014, and I go back to the contact field and expand it, I still have one record. But when I expand payments, you'll see I now have 2 records, and that's because there are 2 payments on that invoice. So just be aware that if you expand the data, it behaves differently whether it's a record or a table field. And why is that important? If you expand a field that's a table of data, you then have to be mindful of what fields you use on your reports and charts because you may be duplicating your numbers. If I scroll across, notice that my total field is duplicated. Both rows have the same value because it's the same invoice. But if I were to start summing that column, it would be counting the value twice. The last operation I'll showcase is how to add a custom column to your Power Query. I won't go too far in depth as to the language used to calculate the value, but we'll quickly showcase it's possible to do. If I go to the Add Column tab in Power Query, I can choose Custom Column. In this dialog, I can create a field called Narrative, which will be the concatenation of invoice number, a space, and a reference. And if I click OK, you can see this new narrative field has been added. Now you can do more complex calculation than this, but this showcases that you can actually add your own logic if required. This brings us to the end of this tutorial video showcasing you how to manipulate your data in Power BI using Power Query. There are other operations you can do to combine data from multiple data sets, but I'll leave these for a future video. I hope this has given you a good overview, and I'll speak with you next time. Take care.